The views expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of Lexington Community Radio or its board of directors. The views expressed are solely those of the programmers.
You are listening to Off the Cuff. Now, here's your host, Adam Banks.
Welcome, everybody, to Off the Cuff. I am Adam Banks, coming at you live from Lexington, Kentucky. Thank you for listening to the show, and thank you for tuning in to WLXU 93.9 FM. In addition to listening to us on the radio, you can check out our Facebook live stream at Off the Cuff with Adam Banks, or you can download the Radio Lex app on your smartphone device to listen to us from anywhere in the entire world. I am broadcasting from the Deborah Hensley studios here at Radio Lex on North Limestone. It is January the 9th, 2025, the very first show of the year. We have been off the air for the last 2 weeks. I went to Las Vegas, Nevada last week, and I wasn't able to come to do the show last week, but we are finally back on the air live with brand new episodes. And folks, let me just say, getting back to Vegas was a whole ordeal in itself. As you already know, if you live here in Kentucky, we were hit with a snowstorm, a pretty heavy snowstorm, and I was in Vegas, pretty blue skies, birds are singing, and everything was going to plan. So I go on Sunday. My flight was supposed to leave Las Vegas back to Lexington at 6:30 in the morning. I get there. The flight is on time. Everything's going smoothly. Then they delay the flight 2 hours. And I was thinking, oh, no big deal. They just delayed the flight 2 hours. Then eventually they canceled the flight. So, folks, if you've ever been somewhere as far as Vegas and your flight gets canceled, with the possibility of not finding another flight home, if you've ever been in that situation, you really do feel stranded. You feel on an island by yourself. Well, I started scrambling, trying to find flights back home, back to Lexington. Every flight, one after one, just kept getting canceled. Every time I would book one, it would just get canceled. Finally, I found a red-eye that was the last flight of the day. It left at 11:30 p.m. directly to Cincinnati. Now, granted, it wasn't straight back to Lexington, but I said, I'll take Cincinnati at this point. So I booked the red eye from 11:30, arrived in Cincinnati at 6 a.m. on Monday morning. And then when we arrived and we were landing in Cincinnati, the plane, as it landed, we skidded off the runway. Now, I want to let everybody know that we didn't actually skid off the runway during the actual landing. We were actually taxiing back to our gate. But the plane did, in fact, skid off the runway. And we had to sit there over an hour for a tow truck to come get our plane back on the runway. And the pilot even said, yeah, we're safe, we're fine, the plane is fine, everybody on here is going to be fine, but the runway's slick. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he said on that plane, he said, I don't think we should have been flying today. And when I heard him say that, I was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, I'm glad that we did fly because we did ultimately get home, but the pure thought that they actually put our lives in danger really is scary. But nonetheless, we did make it back home safely. Now, I love Las Vegas. It is one of my favorite cities in the entire world. If I'm ranking favorite cities, Vegas is right up there in the top 3. It is the city of entertainment. I stayed at the Cosmopolitan Hotel. I would say the nicest hotel rooms in Vegas. Now, if you're looking for a hotel room that is nice, Cosmo is probably your best bet. It's got balconies. I was on the 58th floor, which I'm scared of heights, and that's a whole nother story for itself. But the views are spectacular. What a venue that the Cosmopolitan has. And really, Vegas is all about your hotel. You can go to Vegas 20 different times and have a completely different trip every time you go if you stay in a different hotel. My plan is to stay at all the hotels. eventually in Vegas. I always like to stay someplace new when I go. I only stayed 3 days. 3 days is enough in Las Vegas, and it was just a great time, and I am happy to be back. But folks, we are now in a brand new year, and this year has already started off with a bang. As we speak, there are numerous people being evacuated from Southern California due to the wildfires happening in the Hollywood Hills. Over 5 people have been killed. Several have been burned with injuries. And it says here over 180,000 people have been evacuated from Los Angeles. And that is scary. If you've seen the photos, if you've seen the videos, it looks like hellfire and brimstone in California. And the thing about wildfire, if you can see the fire, you need to evacuate, because in any given second, that fire is going to be down to where you're at. Fire, have you ever heard the expression spread like wildfire? That's exactly what's happening in California. That fire will spread very, very fast. And it's just my heart and prayers go out to all the families and victims in Southern California. 2025, folks, we have a lot to look forward to this year. A whole new year, a brand new chapter. We are already on page 9 of this year. But folks, there are all kinds of things to look forward to in the year 2025. For instance, you get to look forward to an Oasis reunion. You guys know the band Oasis. And maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me. You're my Wonderwall. The Oasis band. They're coming back together after a 15-year-long feud between them. They are finally getting back together and going on tour in the year 2025. Also this year, another thing that you get to look forward to is the Grand Theft Auto 6 release. Grand Theft Auto, one of the biggest video games of all time. I had Grand Theft Auto 1, 2, 3, and 4. Never did get around to buying 5, but they say Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to have AI capabilities. I can only imagine what that game is going to be like. It has sold over 190 million units. The last game sold over 190 million units. So it only makes sense that they're making another one. As far as TV shows in 2025, you get to see the return of Yellow Jackets, The White Lotus, The Handmaid's Tale, and The Last of Us. And also, you get to see the series finale of the Netflix series Stranger Things. Coming out, as far as movies in the year 2025, you get to see a new Mission Impossible starring a 62-year-old Tom Cruise. You get to see a brand new Superman movie, which stars a 25-year-old David Corenswet. It will be interesting to see what he does with the Clark Kent character. Also, you get to see a new zombie apocalypse movie from the actor Cillian Murphy, who won the Oscar last year. Snow White is actually coming out with a brand new movie this year in 2025. It will be a live version of Snow White. And then Michael Lionsgate's most anticipated movie of the year, it's called Michael. And it's a biographical film chronologically the life of Michael Jackson. And I couldn't think of a more popular artist that you could do a movie over than the king of pop. If you're thinking about who should you do a movie over as far as musical artist, people like Elvis come to mind, Madonna come to mind, and Michael Jackson come to mind. So what a big movie that is going to be in the year 2025. So much to look forward to, folks. We have a lot of things in the chamber for this year. There is still snow on the ground. I want to give a big shout out to all of our first responders who scraped the roads to making it safe, all of the good Samaritans in the city who took time out to help people dig snow out of people's driveway, push people's car back onto the road. You know who you are. It's people like you who make society better, and I just can't say thank you enough. And on the show thread says, you sing it. Hey, and occasionally I like to break down a few little songs on the radio. Nikki says she can't wait for the Superman movie. Elaine says she cannot wait for the Michael Jackson movie. A lot of things to look forward to, and I'm excited about all of that as well. But folks, we have a great show ahead of you today. You are listening to the first episode of Off the Cuff with Adam Banks for the year 2025. Stick with us. We will be right back. Cuff. Adam Banks here with you. After a year of build-up, WWE's flagship weekly series Monday Night Raw streamed live on Netflix for the first time globally this past Monday on January 6th, kicking off with a WrestleMania-level spectacle. Everybody was anticipating this new venture from WWE. They have been on cable television since their existence, and now for the first time they have moved completely over to streaming. Monday Night Raw is now available on Netflix to stream. It is no longer on the USA Network. And to kick off the new Monday Night Raw on Netflix, they did have a WrestleMania level spectacle. They had all types of old wrestling superstars stop in. Hulk Hogan, who got booed out of the building, by the way. To me, if Hulk Hogan doesn't show up on Monday Night Raw next week as Hollywood Hulk Hogan, I'm going to be very disappointed, because this is exactly what Hogan needed to stay relevant. See, the thing about wrestling, folks, if in real life, if the fans hate you and they're booing you, use that to your advantage to be a heel. Hulk Hogan, we already know, can be a really good heel, so I think we should see the reemergence of Hollywood Hulk Hogan next week on Monday Night Raw. The Rock was there, John Cena, so many legends, The Undertaker, Kurt Angle, etc., etc. And I'm excited to see what the future holds for Monday Night Raw as far as the wrestling world. And folks, anytime that I can talk about wrestling on the show, anytime there is an excuse to talk about it, you know I'm going to find a way to create a topic surrounding a wrestling headline. And since wrestling is in the headlines because of their new debut of Monday Night Raw on Netflix, let's have a wrestling segment. I love wrestling. I think they're the most fascinating athletes in the entire world. The thing about wrestlers is they have this thing in the wrestling industry called kayfabe. Kayfabe, which is basically pretending like you are your character even when you're not on camera. You're supposed to stay in character 365, 24 hours a day just to protect the brand. Because back in the day, wrestling, it was a secret that it was fake. So you had to put on that facade that wrestling was, in fact, real. And because of that, they call that kayfabe. Well, there have been a lot of wrestling interviews in the past. A lot of wrestling interviews on real-life talk shows where wrestlers go on these interviews and they're supposed to stay in character. They're supposed to stay in kayfabe. They're supposed to still pretend like they are the character that they are on TV, even when they're sitting down doing a real-life interview, let's say with Barbara Walters or Diane Sawyer. They're still supposed to stay in character. Well, when you've got personalities like wrestlers, and everybody, it seems like, is always breathing down the wrestler's back about it being a fake industry and about what they do is fake. They like to get under the skin of these wrestlers. And I would like to do a segment about wrestling interviews, but in particularly, I would like to talk about when wrestling interviews go off the rails. Now, an interview that goes off the rails is when an interview goes completely wrong. I mean, what you think's going to happen doesn't happen. The worst happens. That's when an interview goes off the rails. And there have been a ton of wrestling real-life interviews where wrestlers have been interviewed by many different people from the real world on real-life talk shows where the interview didn't go as planned and the interview went off the rails. And I would like to start my list off with something I would like to call the slap heard around the world, and that is when wrestler David Schultz slapped. In 1984, he slapped a 2020 news reporter. His name was John Stossel. He worked for 2020, and he told David Schultz that he thought that wrestling was fake. Well, David Schultz, in real life, slapped him in the face, knocking him to the ground, causing him permanent hearing damage. That is an interview that went off the rails, and the great thing about television, folks, is it was all caught on camera. Take a listen at the slap heard around the world when David Schultz slapped John Stossel when he asked David Schultz if wrestling was fake. Take a look.
Used to be tag team partner of Eddie Mansfield, a wrestler who's just told us how every match is fake. I asked Schultz questions that I assume all wrestlers have been asked dozens of times.
What? Is this a good business?
Yeah, it's a good business. I wouldn't be in it if it wasn't.
Why is it a good business?
Because only the tough survive. That's the reason you ain't in it. And this punk holding the camera reading he ain't in it. Reading these rednecks out here ain't in it. Because it's a tough business.
That's terrific.
What, is that all you got?
I'll ask you the standard question. You know,
Standard question.
I think this is fake.
You think it's fake? What's that? Is that fake? Huh? What the hell's wrong with you? That's open hand slap, huh? You think it's fake? You come like them it's fake?
He slaps him again, and then he falls to the floor, and then you see John Stossel run away. Now, John Stossel eventually went on to sue the WWE and David Schultz and won for an undisclosed amount. And unfortunately, David Schultz was fired because of this incident, but it was definitely an interview that went off the rails. Now, next up on my list of a wrestling interview that went off the rails is when Vince McMahon sat down with Bob Costas on HBO and in an interview talking about the XFL. And during the interview, Bob Costas started asking Vince McMahon questions that Vince McMahon wasn't prepared for. He started asking Vince McMahon questions about the safety of wrestling moves being done at home by children. That really irritated and got under the skin of Mr. McMahon. So I want you to listen to how hostile Vince McMahon gets towards Bob Costas when he started asking him these questions. Take a listen.
Here now, Vince McMahon. Thanks for coming, Vince. Can you guarantee me right now that there will be a year 2 for the XFL?
What a ridiculous statement.
It's not a statement, it's a question.
It's a question. I beg your pardon. It's a question. No.
If this turns out to be a grand-scale failure...
You want to let me finish here for a second, pal? Shut your mouth and let me answer the question, all right? I'll be happy to answer. You got a situation that you don't know what you're talking about.
Vince, we got to go.
Oh, it's too bad. This is such a delightful show, Bob. And thank you so much for having me on.
I appreciate your coming on.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a delight.
And there is more just ahead, my friends.
So there you go. There was a lot more to that interview. Those were just highlights. The interview lasted about 15 minutes, and it was Vince McMahon a lot of the times really going at it, getting in Bob Costa's face, telling him that he better shut his mouth, etc., etc. Man, that is one interview I would recommend you looking up on YouTube. Okay, another wrestling interview that went completely off the rails was an interview in Kuwait when Vader lost it with a reporter when the reporter started talking about, again, wrestling being fake. Vader did not appreciate it, and Vader gets up out of his seat during this live, real-life interview in Kuwait and attacks the interviewer for asking him if it was fake. Take a listen.
Physically, no man can do what I do in the ring. If they could, why wouldn't they be out there making the type of money we make? Enjoy the type of fame and lifestyle that we enjoy. So I find your remark and your question insulting.
It's not my question, it's somebody...
Is that fucking huh? Does that feel fake?
Hey.
Does it?
Oh, no, just...
Why don't you come down tonight, and before I kick his ass, I'll kick your ass.
Okay.
All right?
Just calm down.
Hey, we're not here to be insulted. I'm not here to be insulted.
Okay. Right, هذه شيء من الثانية أما صجية.
And then he goes to commercial break. What I love about this interview the entire time is there's soft classical music playing in the background, and the whole time this reporter is getting attacked, and there's that awkward silence in between. You can still hear that classical music. But don't tell Vader wrestling is fake. He really takes that to heart. Okay, next up on my list as a wrestling interview that went off the rails happened in 1999 between three women, Chyna, Deborah, and Sable. They sat down for an interview in Canada, and this was a time when so Chyna and Sable actually go at it in an oral argument in real life on the air. And this was at a time when both women were prominent figures in the WWE, with Sable being one of the top female wrestlers, and Chyna was just a trailblazer because she competed with men in matches. And the situation quickly escalated when Sable and Chyna were asked about their rivalry and their positions within the company. And the tension between the two women was already very noticeable anyway. But when they started questioning, they started alluding to the fact, Sable started to allude to the fact that Chyna only had the body she has because of steroids. And the reason Sable was so upset and started pointing fingers at Chyna is because Chyna started belittling Sable and saying that Sable, she could be in 3 seconds, etc., etc. Well, this was a real-life interview that went off the rails. This was not supposed to happen. They were not supposed to get in this argument. They were here promoting an event for the WWE. And because of the line of questioning, these two ladies got into an argument. Now, keep in mind, this is an argument between Chyna and Sable. And Deborah is still there, but she's just kind of watching the show go down. Take a listen.
I have absolutely no interest in the women's belt. First of all, it would take me 2 seconds to get it. Second of all,
let me just be the first to say that you and I have never fought, so you are totally not sure of yourself about that.
Is there anybody in here that doesn't think that I could squash Sable in a second?
Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but I have a lot of confidence in myself, and I say you can't.
And you've got the belt. You're the newcomer on the scene, Deborah McMichael.
Hey, if they match up, I'll be the referee.
There you go.
Because I'm not going to get involved in that.
And if you guys match up and you're the referee, I must be in the front row.
You know, I think it takes a lot of... doesn't take a lot of guts for Chyna to say what she just said, but I think it really demeans the women's division, and she needs to remember that this is a company and we all work for the same company. And just because we don't do exactly the same things you do to get the body you have doesn't mean that you're any better than we are.
But that's not the issue, Sable. The issue is whether I can beat you or not. I'm twice your size, I have twice your strength, and
okay,
that's
but why
what
are you twice my
to.
size and twice my strength?
Because I am. That's life, sister. I worked hard to get that way, and I could squash you in a second.
What are you saying, Sable?
You know, I work out just as hard as you do, but I do not supplement my body the way you do either.
Yes. And folks, the cat fight got real. What an argument between those ladies. Okay, one more on my list of wrestling interviews that went off the rails, and this is a big one. This happened in January of 1985 when Hulk Hogan and Mr. T went on a talk show hosted by a man named Richard Belzer. And the incident involved Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, and Richard Belzer during a live segment on his show Hot Properties. Richard Belzer, a comedian and actor best known for his role on Law & Order, was the host of the show, and the altercation became infamous due to a heated exchange between Belzer and the wrestling stars, which was both uncomfortable and controversial. Now, Richard Belzer is going to explain in this clip exactly what happened, and as he explains, you're also going to be able to hear audio clip of the actual interview. So basically what happens is Hulk Hogan demonstrates a wrestling move on the host and puts him to sleep, you know, because wrestling's fake, right? And he really puts him to sleep, drops Belzer on his head, and cracks his head open live on TV. Take a listen.
For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, we had a very ugly incident here last week on the show. Hulk Hogan and Ms. T were here, and Hulk Hogan did a demonstration, and he hurt me real bad. I split my head open, and I was knocked unconscious and so on. So just to show that I'm not a part of their promotional tool and that this was real, I want you to take a look at this clip. And keep in mind, this was real. Take a look at it, and remember, I had no idea what was about to happen. And I'll be right back.
Now, the first thing you need to know about amateur wrestling or professional wrestling are submission holds. You just tell me, brother, when you want him to quit squealing, okay?
All right.
It's called a front chin lock. How about it, T?
Keep him like that for a little while. Because he's all right. He's just sleeping. He's sleeping.
Ooh.
Really, I was a sleeper hold.
They dropped him to the floor, and now he's laying there unconscious.
See, it works. All right, brother.
And now, we'll be right back after this word from you-know-who. We'll be right back.
Okay, I had no idea when I got up and said we'll be right back. I had no idea where I was. I was in shock, and I know I'm doing this a little bit, maybe going too far. But can we get a close up of these stitches? Because I saw Bill Cosby today, and he thought it was a hoax.
Well, and he's showing the head of his stitches that he got from the incident. And if you watch the video, you will see blood coming from his head when he hit the floor.
And this is not the first incident between a professional wrestler.
And again, folks, this was not supposed to happen. It was not part of the show, and it went completely off the rails. And Richard Belzer did sue the WWE and Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. Now, keep in mind, this was 1984, right at the beginning of Hulk Hogan's career. And this really almost put a stop to Hulkamania, because Hulk Hogan was considered to almost be fired because of the incident that happened on this talk show. Now, it didn't happen because we ultimately know how wrestling went, but that, folks, was a huge mishap for a wrestling interview. And there have been more wrestling interviews that have went completely off the rails. But for the sake of time, I had to narrow them down to what I felt like was pretty much the top 5 wrestling interviews that went off the rails. And I wanted to do a wrestling segment because wrestling is in the headlines. Monday Night Raw debuting on Netflix this past Monday. It had huge ratings. WWE is anticipating a whole new audience thanks to Netflix. Folks, I don't see how cable television is going to last. When sports makes its way over to streaming, which it is slowly doing, that is going to be the final nail in the coffin. I know I say it all the time, but eventually that is going to happen. But folks, we still have a great show ahead of you today. You are listening to Off the Cuff with Adam Banks. Stick with us. We will be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Off the Cuff. Adam Banks here with you. Today, we lay to rest former President Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States. He died in Plains, Georgia, surrounded by his family. He made it to 100 years old. You know, I've talked about my man Jimmy for a long time, rooting for him. 100 years, what a life. And folks, we talk about great presidents all the time. And on this show, we've also talked about what it takes and what it's like to be a former president. Jimmy Carter, was he a good president? No. Did he leave behind a good legacy? Absolutely. Because Jimmy Carter quite possibly could have been the best and greatest former president that this country has ever seen. Now, notice I said the greatest former president that we've ever seen, and that's partly because of his work and philanthropy towards American citizens with his Habitat for Humanity, building houses for low-income families. Jimmy Carter was the son of a peanut farmer and took over the family business in 1953 before his political career took off. He was an unlikely president. Nobody ever thought he would get elected, but he did, and he was a 4-year president. He served a single term from 1977 to 1981, losing a re-election bid to Ronald Reagan. Jimmy Carter became the oldest living former president when he surpassed the record held by the late George H.W. Bush in March of 2009. Jimmy Carter's beloved wife, Rosalind, died in November of 2023. They had been inseparable during their 77-year marriage. It's always interesting to see people who have been married that long, 77 years. Usually when one dies, the other one's not too far behind. And Rosalind died in November, and then Jimmy Carter just a month later in December of last year. Now, Jimmy Carter, he has had several decorated awards in his name. He has won a Grammy. He has won a Nobel Peace Prize. And he graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in June of 1946. Him and Rosalind had 4 children: John William Jack, born 1947, James Earl III, born in 1950, and Donald Jeffrey and Amy Lynn, born in 52 and 67. So Jimmy Carter, he had a lot of accomplishments while being president. I don't want to say these are great, big accomplishments that we'll look back on as a country and say, wow, what a good president. But the impact that he had outside of being the president is what makes his legacy so strong. Now, Jimmy Carter served in the Georgia State Senate from 63 to 66. He tried unsuccessfully for the Democratic governor nomination in 1966. In 1970, he was elected to governor of Georgia and served from 71 to 75. On December 12, 1974, when he announced his presidential bid, there was a newspaper article in Atlanta with the headline, Jimmy Who? Jimmy Who? Because remember, Jimmy Carter, nobody knew who he was. He was a very unlikely president. He was a nobody who got elected. In 77, he was sworn in as the 39th president, and on his first full day in office, he pardons most Vietnam-era draft evaders. In 1980, he denied a second term by Ronald Reagan, who ended up destroying him for the re-election bid. In 1984, the Carters spend a week building Habitat for Humanity houses, launching what becomes the annual Carter Work Project. 99 is when Bill Clinton awarded Jimmy and Rosalind Carter the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In 2002 is when he won his Nobel Peace Prize. In 2014, he won his Grammy. And his funeral is actually happening today. It happened earlier today. I watched it on CNN. If you haven't ever watched a former president's funeral, folks, you have to watch one. It is like watching the funeral of a king or a queen for a different country. That's essentially what the presidents are here in this country. Let's see, on the show thread, it says here that we're having some technical difficulties on the air, and if we do, I promise you folks, we'll work on those to get those back, to get us back on the air eventually, but I can only do so much as I broadcast live on the air. But the funeral was just in general a wild thing to watch, because you watch all of the former presidents get together, and during that situation today, you've seen Mike Pence and Donald Trump shake hands for the very first time since 2020. And Mike Pence stood up to shake Donald Trump's hand. Mike Pence's wife remained seated. I think that is the stupidest thing that she could have done. How immature are you? Put your differences, your political differences, your personal agendas aside during a funeral, especially for a former president. When you are in the role that you're in, don't be a little immature little baby and squirrel up your nose and not stand up and shake somebody's hand because they said something you didn't like. Stop it. You were supposed to be the pinnacle of what we look up to. Just in general, you are in the highest roles of the land. President, vice president, former presidents, and the way some of these people were acting. You know, you seen Vice President Kamala Harris roll her eyes when she seen Barack Obama and Donald Trump chatting it up. You've seen George H.W. Bush not even get a handshake from Hillary or a Bill. And I'm just sitting there thinking, folks, like, what in the world? What in the world? How immature can you be? We seen Donald Trump and Barack Obama talking it up. That seemed to irritate a lot of people, especially those who hate Trump, but I loved it. I loved every second of the fact that Obama and Trump were chalking it up. like two boys, just two boys in the locker room. And I love that because it shows, you know what? We're putting our differences aside for this one event, unlike some people at that funeral. It was fascinating to watch, just watching his casket get carried away to the barricade. They're taking him to Georgia to lay him to rest there in his hometown next to his wife of 77 years. And it was an interesting funeral to watch. George Strait and his wife Trisha Yearwood sang a song. The eulogy was given by President Joe Biden. Did he stumble over his words? Absolutely. But he did get through it for the most part. That was something set in stone by Jimmy Carter before he passed. He asked Joe Biden to give his eulogy. Basically, they had an arrangement. Whoever went first is given the eulogy at each other's funeral. Well, Jimmy Carter went first, so Joe Biden gave the eulogy. Makes you wonder who's going to be the next former president that has a funeral. We only have a few left. We've got Bill Clinton, we've got George W. Bush, we've got Barack Obama, we've got Joe Biden, and now we've got Donald Trump. All signs are pointing to Joe Biden being the next one to go because of his cognitive decline and his health decline over the last year. But you know what, folks? I've seen crazier things happen. Joe Biden might outlive us all. We don't know. But it was an interesting event, to say the least, and it had been broadcasted for a couple of days. Usually the president's funeral takes a while because there's a lot of ceremony that is involved with it, but the actual funeral was today. You've seen a lot of former politicians there. You've seen a lot of current politicians there. You've seen Jimmy Carter's grandkids speak at the funeral, his kids speak at the funeral. And it was just a very, very lovely service. So there we go, Jimmy Carter and his legacy. I think that Jimmy Carter will not be remembered as a great president, but he will be remembered as a great former president. So here is Jimmy Carter in his own words describing what he thinks his legacy will be after it's all said and done. Take a listen.
Your own legacy, do you think?
Well, I kept our country at peace. I never sent a soldier into battle. I never bombed anybody. I negotiated peace for other people, like in the Mideast and Zimbabwe. And I promoted human rights to the utmost of my ability. So if people 100 years from now remember me, I would like for them to connect peace and human rights to my name.
It's an honor being in your presence.
Thank you very much, Larry.
Jimmy Carter, folks, 100 years old. God bless him and his family. But this seems like a great spot to take Off the Cuff's Song of the Week. And since I was in Vegas for a few days, longer than what I anticipated to be, I discovered a new song while I was out there. And the song is actually called Vegas, and it's by my boy Shabuzi. And this is his song, Vegas. And we will be back after the song. Stick with us, folks. We will return. Today's national holiday is Law Enforcement Day, and if you have a police officer as a friend or a family member, National Law Enforcement Day is today. So it's the perfect time to show officers that we understand how difficult their job is. Now, law enforcement, you've heard me go around and round with them. There's a lot of bad cops out there, but there are a lot of good cops out there too. Without law enforcement and without the police, it really would be the wild, wild west out there. They are here to protect and serve. The police works for us, and cops that really understand that role and that title, and those who do serve the community and the city that they work for, really does say a lot. And there are a lot of great law enforcement agencies out there and a lot of good police officers. So today's national holiday is Law Enforcement Day. New York City is the first American city to establish a police force, and that happened in 1844. Once again, New York leads the way with adopting the first detective unit in 1857. In 1905, Pennsylvania becomes the first state to establish a state police force. In the 1920s, Berkeley, California's police force gets ahead of the curve serve by adopting centralized and consistent training, communications, and order throughout its police force. Here are some fun facts about police officers. In colonial America, due to the lack of authority, officers were not very effective at catching criminals. In fact, churches had more authority to hold trials. It says here, the Japanese police once experimented with a motorcycle arresting device for trapping biker gangs. In Thailand, police officers are sometimes forced to wear Hello Kitty armbands for violations like showing up late to work. In England, police officers are sometimes called bobbies. The name is in honor of the founder of the modern police department, Sir Robert Peel. And the final fact here, the 10% penalty tax on early withdrawals from a 401k plan do not apply to withdrawals made by a public safety employed, as defined by the IRS. And at least here in Kentucky, police officers have gotten a big raise over the last few years. I think a starting state trooper in this state is making upwards of $50,000 a year. That's starting out. Now, what entry-level positions do you know that start you out at $50,000 a year? I wouldn't want to do that job. That's a very hard job to do, the things that they have to go through. So I think that it is very warranted, and I think that it is very deserving that they do have such a high starting pay. If you want to celebrate today's national holiday, Law Enforcement Day, you can show support on social media and by wearing blue, or you can volunteer or donate to your local Crime Stoppers program. But folks, we still have one more segment to go. Stick with us. You are listening to Off the Cuff with Adam Banks. We will be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Off the Cuff. Adam Banks here with you. Last segment of the hour. Folks, we did a memoriam for the final episode in 2024 talking about some of the most notable deaths that have happened. But we did that show on December 26th, and there were still 5 days left in the year. And unfortunately, there were more people that passed away that we didn't get to talk about on that memoriam, Jimmy Carter being one of them. But another notable death that happened over the last couple of weeks since we've last been on the air is the death of legendary broadcaster Greg Gumble. Greg Gumble, a longtime CBS sportscaster who broke barriers during his career, calling some of the biggest sporting events of all time, and most notably known as the voice of March Madness. He passed away from cancer at the age of 78, died on December the 27th. Now listen, I can't imagine a March Madness without Greg Gumble. Hello everybody, I'm Greg Gumble and welcome to CBS Studios here in New York. We are underway with a brand new fresh bracket here on March Madness. See, I can't even do it as good as him. He just had such a pleasant demeanor, a pleasant voice about him. He went under the radar as far as legendary broadcasters go because he was very low-key. He didn't showboat any at all. He wasn't as brash as Dick Vitale. He wasn't as controversial as, Stephen A. Smith. But Greg Gumble was still right up there with the greats as being a legendary broadcaster. He was so good at what he did. I mean, he was so good at what he did. He missed the NCAA tournament for the first time since 1997 last year due to what he said at the time was family health issues. Now, we're seeing a little bit more clarity with why he had to miss last year. He had health issues of his own, and he not only did the CBS Selection Sunday show, but he also broadcasted many sporting events like the Super Bowl. He broadcasted many Super Bowls as a play-by-play guy. A lot of people didn't think that Greg Gumble did play-by-play, but he certainly did. He certainly did pre-shows for the NFL, for the NCAA. But what I liked about him the most, and what I think he will be remembered for the most, is what he did at the anchor desk during the Selection Sundays shows. And folks, it still ain't going to be the same without him. I mean, take a listen at my man Greg Gumble calling the action, the Selection Sunday show back in 2019, and you tell me if this doesn't bring back memories, and you tell me if this isn't something that you're going to miss.
Good
Good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Gumble. Welcome to the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship Selection Show. Just a short while ago, the selection committee finished up this year's tournament brackets. 32 teams received an automatic bid, 36 await an at-large. Joining me now to help us reveal the 68-team field, Clark Kellogg, Seth Davis, all kinds of storylines in play. What are the biggest questions?
Well, I think man, oh man. See, that's just something I'm going to miss. We heard that every single year. Is it really even going to feel like Selection Sunday without Greg Gumble calling the action? Now, a lot of people might have not have known this, but Greg Gumble is the brother of legendary broadcaster Bryant Gumble. Bryant Gumble used to host a morning show with Jane Pauley back in the day, back in the 90s, and there was nobody more poised than Bryant Gumble. I mean, you talk about a guy who was he was an alpha male. He was very poised. He was very confident, and it's like he never messed up. He was flawless on the air. And then you listen to his brother, and then you're thinking, what kind of genetics does these men have? Because Greg, he might have not have been the same as his brother, but he was still very polished in his own way, in his own right. I tell you, I don't know who was better, Bryant or Greg. I think they were each distinguished at their chosen professions in broadcasting. Bryant Gumble did well with morning TV. Greg Gumble did well with sports. Greg Gumble, he worked for CBS, ESPN, and the Madison Square Garden Network throughout his years. He won local Emmy Awards during his long career and was the recipient of the 2007 Pat Summerall Award for Excellence in Broadcasting. So my thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Greg Gumble. And Selection Sunday, it is just not going to be the same. But folks, that pretty much wraps up another episode of Off the Cuff with Adam Banks. If you liked what you heard today, you'll probably like all of our previous episodes. We archive them all on podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me, the show host, on social media at The Adam Banks. You can follow the show on social media at Off the Cuff with Adam Banks. We release new episodes every Thursday from 4 to 5 right here on WLXU 93.9 FM, which means we will be back same time, same place. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Off the Cuff, and I am the King of Radio, Adam Banks. I will catch you down the road.